Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be doing my presentation on the history of performances in the medieval church, the 18th century opera house, and jazz concerts. Medieval church performances developed during the 9th and 10th centuries, mainly in Western and Central Europe. A popular style of music that was performed was called Gregorian chant, which is a monophonic form of singing in Latin and sometimes Greek. This style of singing consisted of 12 modes, where its beautiful melodies were unaccompanied. Typically sung by men and women in the church and of religious orders, this tradition of chanting scripture was meant to help establish a connection to God. The link below is a Gregorian Latin chant called Salve Regina, performed by monks of the Abbey of Notre Dame. Medieval church performances were performed in beautiful cathedrals, where the voices would echo and bounce off of each other. The audiences were full of religious church members who were worshiping God as they listened to this music, so they were very active listeners connecting to both the lyrics and the melodies on a deep level. These people were members of the church and were very educated on the meaning behind the music. 18th century opera houses were popular during 1700 and 1800 and took place in Italy, Germany, and London. 18th century opera was dominated by castratos, which were classical male singers who could sing soprano and mezzo-soprano. The most famous castrato was Farinelli, who could hold a note for over a minute and sing 3 octaves. There were female opera singers at this time, but men stayed and remained the most dominant. Some other famous castratos included Salomia Deschner, Edouard Dupuy, and Josefa Derschik. Famous composers include Jean-Philippe Romeo and Giovanni Paisiello. The song I'm about to play is composed by Vivaldi and sung by Felipe Jarowski, called Sovente e Sol. 18th century opera was performed in theaters and concert halls with auditoriums that were lit by chandeliers. Going to the opera was a social occasion in the 18th century, and the audience was mostly wealthy upper class who were somewhat active but also passive during these performances. They chatted, played games, and sometimes laughed during these performances as a form of entertainment. The audiences were somewhat educated because they were mostly engaging with the material on a surface level, but sometimes the storyline would become quite serious. The stories behind operas ranged from adaptations of Greek mythology to political intrigue or history, and they were performed by noble or mythological creatures. So jazz clubs and concerts were popular during the 19th and 20th centuries and were located mostly in New Orleans, Louisiana, United States. Jazz music was dominated by African Americans, and it developed from roots in blues and ragtime. Most jazz music consists of prominent meter, improvisational solos, distinctive tonal colors, performance techniques, and so much more. Some of the most famous jazz figures in history were Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and many more. The song that I'm going to play was written in 1931 by Duke Ellington and Irving Mills, called It Don't Mean a Thing.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm every little thing you've got. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
Jazz performances were held at festivals, on the streets, jazz clubs, restaurants and bars, and honestly anywhere where people could gather around and enjoy the music. One of the most famous jazz festivals is Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, both held annually in New Orleans. Audiences consisted of mostly African Americans, but eventually became mainstream and listened and appreciated by all races. Audiences were very interactive through dance and actively listening, especially during the 19th and 20th centuries. These audience members were either musicians themselves or the general public, and were able to understand what the music was about because it represented their culture and was very relatable. Some songs were about hardships, better days, and love and relationships. If I could attend one of these historical performances, it would have to be Mardi Gras or Jazz Fest in New Orleans. I'm actually currently in New Orleans right now, staying with family during the pandemic. This is when Jazz Fest would normally be taking place, and this is the first year in history they haven't been able to have it. So I hope that in the future, attending festivals like these will be possible again. Thank you all for listening, and that is my presentation.